The wind on Christmas Eve was a razor across the plains, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of a deeper snow. It sculpted the drifts against the stark, skeletal buildings of redemption, a town that had chosen its name with more hope than honesty. For Alistair Munro, riding the perimeter of his isolated ranch, the wind was just another voice in the vast, lonely conversation of the frontier. His duster was pulled tight, the collar high against his neck, and the Winchester rifle in its scabbard was a familiar weight against his leg, a cold and constant companion. He was a man carved from the same hard granite as the nearby mountains, his face a roadmap of sun and sorrow. He preferred the company of his cattle and the stoic silence of the winter landscape to the brittle civilities and simmering resentments of the town. His isolation was a choice, a fortress built against a world he no longer trusted. Then, through the swirling snow, he saw it. A dark shape against the grey-white canvas of the town square, an anomaly that snagged at the corner of his vision. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, pulled him closer. The sight that greeted him froze the air in his lungs more effectively than the biting cold. A woman, barely more than a girl, was tied to the town's central hitching post. She was Chinese, her traditional dress, once perhaps vibrant silk, now a tattered ruin of rags clinging to her frame. Her black hair was matted with snow and something darker. Her head was bowed, but he could see the slow, pained rise and fall of her chest. Above her, nailed crudely to the post, a plank of wood bore a single, brutal word painted in what looked like axle grease, traitor. The square smelled of wood smoke and the sharp, metallic scent of fresh fear. A small crowd had gathered, a knot of maybe 20 townsfolk, their forms huddled against the cold, their faces grim. They were not a raging mob, not yet, but something worse, a quiet, simmering kettle of judgment, waiting to boil over. Old miners with coughs that rattled in their chests, women with faces pinched by hardship, even a child, too young to understand but old enough to mimic the hate, kicking at a loose stone. Someone spat, a dark stain against the virgin snow. Alistair felt the gravity of the moment settle on him like a shroud before he fully understood its dimensions. The Winchester on his horse. The reputation that kept most men at a respectful distance. The woman's breathing, a fragile flag of life in a sea of hostility. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had stumbled into the final, terrible seconds of a verdict already rendered. He was not supposed to be here. A stray calf had led him miles off his usual path. But a sound, or the memory of one, a cry caught on the wind, had drawn him toward the faint lights of the town. He swung down from his horse, the crunch of his boots on the snow a jarring sound in the charged silence. The crowd turned as one, their collective gaze falling upon him. A man named Gideon, a failed prospector with eyes like chips of flint and a bitterness that soured the air around him, stepped forward. He gestured at the woman with a thumb, as if she were a piece of defective merchandise. "This ain't your business, Munro," Gideon rasped, his voice a gravelly mix of challenge and warning. "This is town business. She helped them railroad Kaine. Gave em food and medicine while our own folk went without. She's a traitor." Alistair's heartbeat was a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. He had stood down a grizzly in the high country and felt calmer. This was different. This was a town trying to excise its own fear by bleeding a scapegoat. He looked at the woman. Her wrists were raw and purple where the rope bit deep. Her face was a canvas of bruises, a tapestry of cruelty. But when she slowly, painfully, lifted her head, her eyes met his not with a plea for help, but with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. She had already accepted her fate. What happened next would test the fragile membrane between frontier justice and a lynching, between minding one's own business and answering the call of a conscience he thought he had long since buried. Alistair did not raise his rifle. He slid it from its scabbard and planted it, but down, into the packed snow and frozen mud. It was a gesture of claiming ground, a declaration. "Stop," he said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the low murmur of the crowd with the clean, sharp crack of breaking ice. The momentum of their hate faltered. They were a river of resentment, and he had just become a dam. Gideon recovered first, puffing out his chest. "This don't concern you, rancher. This is our town, our traitor. It's justice. Your town is a piece of land with a name, Alistair replied, his voice flat and deliberate, each word placed with care. And I see no justice here. I see a rope, a post, and a crowd that's forgotten what Christmas Eve is supposed to mean. A younger man shoved his way to the front, his face hollowed by hunger and rage. One of his sleeves was pinned shut, an empty testament to a mining accident. She gave water and herbs to them coolies, he spat, jabbing his remaining hand toward the woman. While my brother was coughing his lungs out, she was tending to them. She chose them over us. Alistair let the accusation hang in the frozen air. He counted 3 slow breaths, letting the silence work for him. Then, he asked a question that seemed to have no place in the raw emotion of the moment. What's her name? The question was a wrench in the works. The one-armed man blinked, thrown off his rhythm. What? Her name, Alistair repeated, his voice slower, calmer. If you're fixing to kill her for treason, you must at least know her name. You must have a charge, a witness who ain't just repeating rumors. Show me the paper from a judge. Show me the sheriff's order. Show me anything that says this is the law and not just a pack of wolves deciding who to eat. Gideon sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. We don't need paper to know betrayal when we see it. Then you don't have justice, Alistair's voice hardened, finding an edge he rarely used. You have revenge. And revenge is a private thirst. It ain't the law. A woman's voice, raw with grief, rose from the back of the crowd. She let them live. The ones who take our jobs, who bring sickness. She helped them. Alistair's gaze found the woman, a widow perhaps, her face a mask of loss. He softened his tone, but not his resolve. Did she take your husband's job? Did she bring the sickness here herself? Or did she just show a moment of kindness to another living soul? She gave them mercy, the widow choked out. When we had none. Then she was a healer, Alistair said simply, doing what healers do. Traitor, someone shouted from the edge of the crowd. The word was a stone, and others picked it up, a chant beginning to build, hesitant at first, then gaining heat as the mob tried to remember its own fury. It was then Alistair saw him, the real source of the poison. Not Gideon, the loudmouth bully, but a man standing 3 rows back. Orin, the man who ran the town's mercantile, dressed in a fine wool coat that seemed out of place amidst the threadbare clothes of the others. He was clean-shaven, his eyes cold and assessing. Orin hadn't lost a brother or a job. Orin had lost control. The railroad brought new people, new money he couldn't dictate. He needed someone to blame, a target to unite the town's fear behind him. Orin stepped forward, his movement smooth and practiced. Mr. Monroe, he began, his voice reasonable, a politician's balm on a raw wound. We understand your principles. But you must understand the sentiment of this community. This woman defied the town's will. She consorted with outsiders who threaten our way of life. These are the facts. The verdict has been decided. Decided by who, Orin? Alistair asked, his eyes locking with the man's. By you. By the people she betrayed. Then the people have no authority, Alistair's words fell like stones. But I do. Orin's smile was thin and cold. You're one man, Monroe. One man with a ranch to run and cattle to lose. This town has a long memory. You cannot police every shadow, every night. We will have our justice. It was a threat veiled in civic concern, a calculation of power. Alistair felt a subtle shift in the crowd. The tide was turning against him again. He took one step forward, then another, until he was close enough for Orin to see the frost on his beard, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the unwavering conviction that had settled there. You're right, Alistair said, his voice quiet, for Orin's ears alone. I am one man. But I'm the man holding the Winchester. And if you or any of your friends touch her again, you'll learn just how much trouble one man can be when he decides the law matters more than the mob. Orin's smile faltered. Alistair pivoted, raising his voice to address the whole crowd. This woman is now under my protection. Any attempt to harm her will be considered an attack against me. If you have a real charge, you bring it to Sheriff Brody in the light of day. Until then, you will disperse. Go home. It's Christmas Eve." He turned his back on them, a calculated risk, and walked to the post. The woman, he would later learn, watched him, her dark eyes weary but lucid. "I am Alistair Munro," he said, his voice low. "I'm going to cut these ropes. Do you understand?" She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He drew his Bowie knife. The steel caught the faint light from the saloon window. The rope was coarse hemp, tied with a knot meant for securing cargo, not a person. It parted with a groan. She slumped forward, her strength gone, and Alistair caught her, his arm unexpectedly gentle around her shoulders. She weighed almost nothing, a bird made of hollow bones. "It's over," he murmured, though he knew it was far from it. Behind him, the crowd did not riot. It simply dissolved, melting back into the alleys and doorways, leaving behind only footprints in the snow and the lingering stain of their hatred. Orrin was the first to disappear. Gideon spat one last time and turned away. The grieving widow covered her face and wept silently. Alistair lifted the woman into his arms, cradling her as if she were made of glass. As he carried her to his horse, he felt the immense, crushing weight of his choice. His life of quiet isolation was over. He had stepped out of the shadows and into the fight. The war for redemption soul had just begun, and he had made himself its unwilling general. The cabin at Alistair's ranch smelled of cedar smoke, brewing coffee, and drying wool. He had laid Mai on his own cot by the hearth, a small, still form beneath a thick buffalo hide. For hours, she had drifted in a state between sleep and consciousness. He had cleaned her wounds with whiskey and hot water, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. The catalogue of her injuries was a silent testament to the town's cruelty: rope burns that had cut to the bone, cracked ribs, the deep, purple mottling of bruises across her back and arms. As twilight bled across the snow-covered plains, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the rough-hewn log walls, the stone fireplace, the man sitting on a crate, watching her. She didn't startle, but a guarded stillness came over her, the defense of someone who had learned that kindness was often just a prelude to a different kind of pain. "Shui," she whispered, the word a dry rasp. "Water." Alistair reached for the ladle in the bucket by the door and held it to her lips. She drank in small, hesitant sips, as if expecting it to be taken away. When she finished, she spoke again, her English heavily accented but clear. "You are the man from the square." "Alistair Munro." He set the ladle down. "You're safe here." A dry, mirthless sound, almost a laugh, caught in her throat and turned into a painful cough. "Safe. I have heard this word." "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as if her name itself was a possession too valuable to give away. "Mai," she said finally. "My name is Mai." "Tell me what happened, Mai." "From the beginning." She told her story in fragments, her voice a low monotone, as if recounting a tale that had happened to someone else. She and her father had come west with the railroad, he a laborer, she a healer, trained by her grandmother in the old ways of herbs and remedies. They were saving money to send for her mother and sisters in Guangdong. The railroad camp was a city of tents and hardship, but it was a community. Then the fever came. Diphtheria, the white doctor called it, before he packed his bags and left, declaring the camp a lost cause. Mai had fought it with the knowledge she possessed, brewing teas from willow bark and elderflower, tending to the sick and dying. Her father was among the first to fall. She was left alone, a young woman in charge of dozens of sick men. The town of Redemption had quarantined the camp, refusing them supplies. But the fever did not respect their boundaries. It crept into town, sickening a few of the poorer families, the ones who lived on the fringes. A woman, Mai said, her eyes fixed on the fire, her boy was sick. The town doctor wanted money she did not have. She came to me in the night, begging. Mai had helped. She had used the last of her precious herbs on the child. But the boy was too far gone. He died. And the grieving mother, in her pain and ignorance, twisted my help into a curse, an accusation of witchcraft, of foreign poison. Orin, seeing his opportunity, fanned the flames. He claimed Mai was hoarding a cure, that she was purposefully letting the white townsfolk die while saving her own. The lie took root in the fertile soil of their fear. They came at night, Mai continued, her voice trembling for the first time. They dragged me from my tent. They said my medicine was a curse. They said I had betrayed the kindness of this land by helping my own people. They beat the men who tried to help me. She was tied to the post at dawn. They had painted the sign while she watched, forcing her to look at the word that would condemn her. They told me I would freeze or hang by nightfall, she finished, her voice a whisper. An example, so others would learn the price of caring. Alistair sat in the heavy silence that followed, the crackling of the fire the only sound. He thought of his wife, Martha, taken by a winter fever 5 years ago. The doctor had been drunk, the medicine useless. He knew the hollow ache of helpless loss. He had built his solitary life upon its foundation. Now, this woman's story was chipping away at it, brick by painful brick. In this country, he said, speaking as much to himself as to her, we've seen rules fall apart. People think because there's no lawman for 100 miles, there's no right or wrong. They think strength is the only law that matters. He had seen it time and again, land grabs, claim jumping, the casual cruelty toward natives. A world where mercy was mistaken for weakness. Mai looked at him, her eyes searching his face. The exhaustion was still there, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. A question. What will happen to me now? You'll stay here, Alistair said, the decision solidifying as he spoke the words. Under my protection. I'll make sure the record shows you acted as a healer. No charges, no trial, no more signs. And when you leave? The question was practical, born of a life of uncertainty. Then you will have a horse, supplies, and a map to a place further west, a place where the world is a little bigger and the minds a little less small. It's not enough. But it is what I can give. She nodded slowly, accepting his fragile promise. Thank you, Alistair Munro, she said. For the water. For the fire. For standing in the square when you did not have to. I did have to, he replied, the truth of it surprising him. I just didn't know it until I saw the rope. The next day, Alistair rode into Redemption, leaving Mai with a loaded shotgun and a warning not to open the door for anyone. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office, a clapboard building that leaned like a tired old man. Sheriff Brody was a man in his late 50s, with a drooping mustache and eyes that had seen too much. He sat behind a desk cluttered with yellowed papers, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his elbow. He looked up as Alistair entered, his expression weary. Knew you'd be coming, Brody sighed, gesturing to a chair. Heard you caused quite a stir last night. I stopped a lynching, Brody. I believe that still falls under your job description. Brody took a slow sip of whiskey. My job, he said, is to keep this town from tearing itself apart. Sometimes that means letting things run their course. You interfered with the town's temperament. Its temperament was to murder an innocent woman. You can put a prettier word on it, but that's the truth of it. Innocent? Brody raised an eyebrow. Orin's been in here all morning. Says she was hoarding medicine, brought the fever from the Kaine camp. Says she put a hex on the Miller boy. And you believe him? Alistair leaned forward, his hands on his knees. You know Orin. He'd burn this whole town down if he thought he could sell the ashes. This isn't about justice. It's about him keeping his thumb on everyone. Listen, Alistair, Brody said, his voice dropping. I understand the impulse. But we're not here to referee every grievance. We're here to keep the peace. You bringing that woman to your ranch, that's not keeping the peace. That's kicking a hornet's nest. Permission to speak freely, Sheriff. Brody waved a hand. You're already neck deep in it. Go on. If we stand by while a mob murders a woman in the town square because they're scared and angry, we're not keeping the peace. We're sanctioning chaos. We become the very thing we claim to be fighting against. We become savages. Careful, Monroe. That sounds dangerously close to preaching. My Bible, Alistair said quietly, is about doing right by people, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Brody studied him for a long moment. You know what your problem is, Alistair? You still think the world is supposed to make sense. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bleak, snow-covered street. I can't protect you. Not officially. Orin has the town council in his pocket. If you keep that woman, they'll come for you. Let them come, Alistair said, standing. That's a fool's answer. Maybe, Alistair conceded at the door. But it's the only one I've got. From Alistair Monroe's personal journal, December 25, 188-. Martha would say I'm borrowing trouble again. She always said I had a stubborn streak that would be the death of me. Maybe she was right. But I keep seeing the rope, the sign, and the look on that girl's face. The way she folded when I cut her free, like a bird with a broken wing. Brody asked me why I did it. I gave him the simple answer. It was wrong. But the truth is deeper. If I had ridden past, if I had let them have her, I would have become them. I would have become the kind of man who lets fear do his thinking for him. The kind of man who watches a wolf pack and calls it justice. I came out here to get away from the world of men. It seems that world has followed me. What is loyalty on this frontier? Is it loyalty to the town that feeds you? To the neighbors who might help you in a blizzard? Or is it loyalty to something quieter? The idea that every soul, no matter their race or tongue, gets a chance to draw breath without a rope around their neck. I buried Martha believing in a just God. I'm not so sure about God anymore. But I'm starting to think justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you make. With your own two hands. The attack came 2 nights later. A full moon illuminated the snow, turning the landscape into a ghostly world of silver and shadow. Alistair had been expecting it. He and I sat in the darkened cabin, the fire banked low. He had 2 rifles and a Colt revolver. She had the shotgun. They appeared first as a line of dark figures on the ridge, torches held high, a fiery serpent against the snow. There were at least 15 of them, led by Gideon and, from a safe distance, Orin. They surrounded the cabin, their shouted threats and insults swallowed by the immense silence of the plains. The first shot shattered the window. Mai didn't flinch. She was crouched by the wall, her expression grimly determined. She had survived a mob once, she would not be taken so easily again. Stay low, Alistair commanded, as he returned fire, his shot aimed not to kill, but to warn. He splintered the porch rail near Gideon, who yelped and dove for cover. For the next hour, the cabin was a fortress under siege. Bullets tore through the log walls, sending splinters flying. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Alistair moved from window to window, a phantom of grim efficiency. Mai was his second, reloading the spare rifle, her movement swift and sure. She pointed out a man trying to sneak toward the barn, and Alistair's shot sent him scrambling back into the darkness. They were not fighting for a piece of land, they were fighting for the principle that a home was a sanctuary, that a life was sacred. Finally, the mob's courage, fueled by whiskey and mob fervor, began to wane in the face of such determined resistance. One of them lay groaning in the snow with a shattered leg. Another had taken a pistol ball to the shoulder. This was not the easy lynching they had envisioned. This was a war. With a final, ragged volley of shots, they retreated, dragging their wounded with them, their torches disappearing over the ridge, leaving only silence and the smell of spent powder. The paperwork of survival was simpler than that of civilization. The morning after the siege, Alistair and Mai sat at his rough-hewn table. The cabin was a wreck, but they were alive. They will come back, Mai said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Alistair agreed. Or they'll try to starve us out. Or have Brody arrest me on some trumped-up charge. Because of me. Because of them, he corrected her. Because of what they are, he looked at her, at the quiet strength that had returned to her eyes. But you cannot stay.